Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Learning to swim is fun. British Swim School is welcoming all new students to start their journey in the world of water. The team of highly trained experts at British Swim School will show your little fish all the ins and outs of life in the water, while also sharing valuable knowledge on water safety. So, is it time for your kids to get their feet wet? Sign them up now at BritishSwimSchool.com. That's BritishSwimSchool.com. British Swim School. Make a splash. Ozcast.
Hello world, I'm Tim Whiffen and you're listening to Strategicon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. COVID-19, novel coronavirus, is rampaging the economies and societies of nations worldwide, yet no continent seems to have such a varied response and impact as Asia. From more relaxed and tempered approaches to the pandemic in Japan, we also see more authoritarian reactions in Indonesia. Which of these approaches has been more effective, and is that all we can take into account? What will Asia look like after a few weeks or a few months of these responses, and how will this impact the Indo-Pacific and world trade? In this, the second episode of a two-part examination, we focus our attention on Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, South Korea, and North Korea. Joining us today is Professor Purnendra Jain, a member of the SIA Advisory Board and SIA's Head of Research and Academic Development. With Purnendra's special interests in many Asian countries, David, John, Purnendra and Tim get into the nitty-gritty of social, economic and diplomatic issues this has caused and may cause into the future. Before we start today's episode, I would like to remind listeners that Strategicon can be found on the Ozcast network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify and on the Sage International Australia website, www.sageinternational.org.au.
Purnendra, of all the countries in Asia, Japan appears the most vulnerable to COVID-19 because of its aging population. Prime Minister Abe has declared a national emergency. With all the technology and wealth at this country's disposal, surely the Japanese will have some of the most sophisticated approaches to fighting this virus. However, Japan has been criticized for its limited testing and the public's lack of interest in following social distancing rules. Was Abe's decision to call a national emergency to do with the increasing severity of COVID-19 in Japan, or was it a reaction to China's decision to relax its travel restrictions?
Okay, on the first point about Japan's decision not to declare a state of emergency before Mr. Abe has done only 2 days ago, Japan's position, let me remind you what happened in Japan. Let me take you back a little bit. It was all about the Diamond Princess, the cruise ship. And I was there in Japan at that time. When this particular issue came to fore, I don't think there was much attention of government on this issue. It was left to the ministry or bureaucrats of that ministry to deal with this issue. There was no political intervention, or there was no political, intervention is the right word at that stage. But as things progressed, what Mr. Abe did, very quickly, he announced that all the schools will be closed. He announced this on a Thursday, and he said all schools will be closed from Monday, which was, of course, some people thought it was a smart move, but many criticisms came of Abe because the schools are not the jurisdiction of the national government. Schools are the jurisdiction of what they call prefectural government in Japan, and even municipal, lower level governments. So some local government, they accepted Abe's declaration and closed their schools, some did not. So that was the beginning. And now with the Diamond Princess, as time moved on, they realized that this was a very serious issue. They took 2-3 weeks to get everything out from that. And the first batch of, if you like, these people with this virus, they came from this cruise ship. So that became a issue of a little concern for Japan and the Japanese government. But they took a very cautious view and very liberal view of this virus. So everything almost business as usual in Japan until February. So only in March, they began to think that, well, there's something wrong, we need to do something about it. But, towards the end of March, a popular Japanese comedian, he died as a result of this coronavirus. A very, very popular guy called Ken Shimura. And with him dying from this coronavirus, people got scared. And they thought that it was not out there. Anyone can have this virus and can die. So it became, it's quite a bit of pressure on government to do something about it. So as a result, not as a result, but if you look at all the developments which have taken place from Diamond Princess to the death of this comedian, in about 2 months' time, the government decided to do something about it. And to do something about it is a state of emergency, which the Abe government announced on the 7th, 2 days ago, actually less than 40 hours ago. But we need to understand this state of emergency is, what does this mean? It really is not a total lockdown in Japan. This state of emergency are some guidelines which the government has provided to people. And this is a kind of a request from the government to the people that what they should not be doing and what they should be doing. So it is for the people to abide by those requests and guidelines. There is no police enforcement. There is no legal enforcement on these things. So whether the Japanese people in general, and these are limited to 7 prefectures in Japan, Tokyo and 3 surrounding prefectures of Tokyo, and then Osaka and another surrounding prefecture of Osaka, and down south in a prefecture called Fukuoka. So these are the most densely populated prefectures. So the state of emergency is enforced only in these 7 prefectures. All other 40 prefectures are operating and can operate, if they want to, business as usual. But I think local governments are becoming quite concerned, so they are putting their own restrictions, own limitations, and people are trying not to get out of their homes and trying to obey what the government has been telling them.
I suspect there's largely cultural things going on, but it is surprising to me that they've taken such a liberal view, and it hasn't just been a wide net that they've cast over their entire country, especially considering that they have one of the best curves of infection rates, infection rate curves worldwide. It seems like they're not necessarily, well, from how you just explained it, I'm interpreting that they're not necessarily as authoritative. They're not necessarily as strict or as much of a police state than other countries who are around them, who are doing much, much worse in Asia.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, that the government does not have legal authority to introduce draconian measures in Japan. They don't have that legal authority. If they want to do it, they have to go back to parliament and pass new laws to do that. But they don't want to go that route. They are trying that if this state of emergency and people's willingness on their own, if they follow these guidelines and rules, the expectation is that they will be able to control it. Going back to John's point, he mentioned about an aging society. Japan has got about 15% of its population is 75 plus, and more than 25% of its population is 65 plus. So it's a really aged society. And you would think that these people will be very vulnerable. But somehow they have so far managed. But one question which keeps coming about the testing regime in Japan. How many people they are testing really is not enough. So testing in Japan is not like South Korea, not like some other countries, even in Australia. So we don't know actually how many might have this asymptomatic condition, but their numbers so far altogether are quite low in both in terms of those who have this virus and those who have died as a result.
It's very interesting looking at Japan because you have such deliberately decentralized power as a consequence of the constitution after World War II. And yet you have this twofold thing of a massive economic stimulus package being organized by the central government, and yet testing, which should be decentralized, and therefore individual prefectures, if they want, should be able to get very motivated about this and have the economic resources, still aren't getting motivated. So it's a strange combination of the best of decentralization, and yet the central government's still pumping huge amounts of money in. So the issue is not money. It really does seem to come down to a question of will.
There is a bit, I think your points are very valid, David, but there are some administrative and some regulatory issues there. Japan has got a national health system. And in this national health system, everyone in Japan is insured. They can go to any doctor, they can walk into a specialist room, they can walk into a hospital, and they are covered. They pay 30%, 70% of that cost is covered through a national health system. So the health system in Japan is very, very good. And local governments do not have much control on these things. They don't have money, as a matter of fact, to handle the health system. That's why there's a national health system and everyone is covered. So when a public health issue like this coronavirus comes up or has come up, it's expected that the national government, everyone will be covered and testing will be done through that system. But Japan may not have enough testing kits at this stage, and they may not have enough people to conduct that testing. I don't know. But what I know is that testing is not being done extensively. Some GPs, I have heard some GPs speak, they say that they think that this person might have that virus, but there's no testing for that person unless that person shows some extreme form of this virus. Otherwise, there's no testing. That was the situation until last week. I don't know if things have changed in Japan. I think not. But local governments have got control on education system. They have got control on transportation. They have got control on other kinds of local issues. And the central government can only issue guidelines to these local governments. And it's for the local governments. So you are right, there is decentralization in Japan to the extent that the national government cannot control and cannot tell them that you must do this. It is for the local government to accept or not to accept government guidelines. But the national health system is very much the function of the national government in Japan.
It's interesting. So they're not testing enough. So let's say a large part of the global population is assessing that Japan is doing quite well, even though they've been dealing with this for a really long time, but clearly they're under testing, so we don't actually know how well they're dealing with it, and especially considering they have such a dense population, it could be a lot worse than the figures say. But you would also expect that they're culturally prepared for this. I mean, they kind of already have a word for what's going on right now, the hikikomori, like, there are going to be more people who are shut-ins. So, and generally just kind of politeness and you were there, everyone's wearing masks, that people are already aware and prepared for this culturally. And I think that's evident because South Korea, which is in some ways culturally similar, are dealing with this well. So could you estimate just how much worse they might be doing, given the fact that they're not testing well?
Well, they're not testing at the level which we have seen in South Korea, for example. In South Korea, they had this drive-by testing, right? So you are in your car and you can get tested. Japan doesn't have that kind of thing. Maybe the health authorities there, they don't think that that's necessary. The other thing in Japan, until last week or 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister was making announcements without actually consulting experts in this area. And that was a big criticism of the Abe government, that how can a cabinet or the Prime Minister's office make announcements without getting advice from medical experts. So Mr. Abe played this criticism very smartly. So he created a little group before his press conference 2 days ago, and he brought the head of this infectious disease control person with him, so that he wanted to look very genuine, and he looked very genuine at that press conference. But he did not talk about, there were some people from the press, they asked some questions, and the idea is that Japan is prepared and local governments are prepared. If people obey or follow those instructions and guidelines, then they think that they are in control of the situation. But if somehow there is a huge cluster where they find thousands of people affected by this virus, I think they will be forced to go a harder way, and they will come up with some kind of legislation, I would guess.
Purnendra, we've heard a lot about how South Korea seems to have been one of the only states in the sort of Indo-Asia area that really had a good policy right from the get-go. But a little bit further north of there is a place called North Korea. And of course, the local dictator, Kim Jong-un, has said, well, we've got no coronavirus problems in this country. And, to be fair on the North Koreans, that may very well be true at an official level because, they've got basically no infrastructure of a modern state to go by. And it's very difficult to actually do a head count on who would be infected, who would be asymptomatic, and so on and so forth. But with North Korea having most of its economy being a black economy, and with that black economy being facilitated by North Korean refugees operating on the Chinese side of the border, shuttling things backwards and forwards between the two states, surely that can't, surely Kim Jong-un's assessment can't be true. Surely coronavirus must have washed up on North Korea, and it's really up to Pyongyang to sort of declare it, right?
On that question, is hard for me to comment. I haven't really followed, but what you have said is what I have read. That North Korea so far, they haven't announced any case of coronavirus in North Korea. But North Korea is not the only one. I think there are 2 other Central Asian states. I can't remember which are those 2, but those 2 states have also not announced any case in their countries. In terms of North Korea, China interaction and trade and the black economy, I guess what you are telling us that there might be some virus which has been exported from China into North Korea. But since we don't have any official statement, and I haven't really read much about this thing, so I don't know. David, do you have any comment to make on this issue?
I've been astounded by how little information has made it out. Normally we expect now, in the same way that you would get the footage we were getting out of Wuhan with people filming, the strange things that were going in as they were locking the city down. You would expect by now, even out of North Korea, to be getting reports. Now, theoretically, the northern border had been tightened over the last 6 to 8 months as they'd tried to control the black economy. But the black economy is so important to getting so many things into the country that even if it had been tightened, I can't imagine it ever being closed. And with the links to rural China, well, I looked for data on what's happened with COVID-19 on the Chinese side of the North Korean border and struggled to find any information about that whole region. So I'm assuming that the blanket over this region is as much a North Korean blanket as it perhaps is a CCP blanket on what's happening regionally.
No, I think we need to find out a little bit more on North Korea, what's happening there, if we can.
This episode's musical interlude comes courtesy of Leaf and Stem with their track Tell You Every Day. Tell You Every Day by Leaf and Stem. We don't need to tell you every day the pandemic that's going on. The media's doing a good enough job of that already. So let's turn back to the discussion about how Asian countries are coping with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Turning to matters strategic. Now, China is the workshop of the modern world, but exporting now becomes problematic, especially on the scale that it did prior to COVID having become an uncontrolled virus, both within China and elsewhere and globally. But then you could actually extend this a little bit further and say that trade is such an important thing. It's the glue that keeps the sort of Indo-Asia area together and keeps it relevant. But when people are prevented from going on shopping expeditions, people are prevented going to stores, people are prevented from doing a lot of stuff, which has now truncated what we could do as economic actors. This is going to have a profound impact on the entire Indo-Asia area, not just the human casualties, but also the economic aspects, which will also have an impact on strategy, surely.
International relations as we knew it will be very different from now on. And you have already touched on some of those aspects, why they will be different. Trade, investment, people's movement, all these things will have significant impact as a result of COVID-19. And we are already talking about whether countries should become a little bit self-dependent or more self-dependent rather than depending entirely on China. It's just not trade. It's about also, in the case of, since we are talking about Indo-Pacific here, we are also talking about Australia, and we know that how universities are going to cope with this COVID-19, because it's a fact that our universities depend quite heavily on international students, in particular from China. So all these things are going to be very, very difficult for many countries in the region. And the level of maybe distrust might develop, because we are not seeing any regional solution or any multilateral solution to this issue. Everyone is on their own. It has become a 19th century sovereign state moment, that each country and each sovereign state to itself. And although at the G20 meeting, leaders talked about it, I don't think there has been any progress from that G20 meeting as to how together they can help out each other, what they can do. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, early on, he said, well, we should have a SAARC solution. That is, South Asian, 7 countries of South Asian countries should have a discussion, and India was ready to help them out if needed. But I don't think that has progressed either. So we are seeing a great erosion in the multilateral framework or multilateral frameworks at this stage, and whether they will revive after this cloud has settled, we don't know. But it looks like, if you look at what's happening between the US and China, accusing each other, and the Trump administration is saying that, look, even the WHO was influenced by China, and he has announced that he might consider cutting funding to the WHO. So all these multilateral organizations will be under great stresses, in my view, in post-COVID-19 situation. We are already seeing that. So international relations, international politics, whether it is in Europe or whether it is in the Indo-Pacific, we will see lots of changes and lots of realignments. Whether China comes at the top, or whether the US remains at the top, or whether multilateralism will be revived, we have to wait and see how these things are going to play out. But my assessment is that things will change quite considerably, because India will no longer be a economic powerhouse. China's economy will slow down. Japan's economy was already slow, and it will further slow down because they are spending so much money on stimulus packages and giving help wherever it is needed for economically poor households. So the economic situation will be very different. And with the economic situation being so different, it will have impact on international relations and how nations relate to each other, both bilaterally as well as in multilateral and regional forums.
Just finally, Purnendra, if we're seeing the end of multilateralism as it had been conceived in the 1990s and sort of kicked on until the COVID crisis hit, could you say that one of the reasons why that's so is because there was an inherent apathy with regard to multilateralism, that we just thought that the juggernaut would continue and it didn't need to be tended, and cared for or made relevant to people. It was just one of those things that we created it, it's running, the economy's doing well, Wall Street's getting its pound of flesh, everyone's happy, and that's it. And that's how it went. We didn't think that we would ever face a global crisis, the likes of which we're currently facing. And we thought that if we were going to find that global crisis, that somehow market forces and multilateralism would find a solution. And clearly it has not.
John, you're right, but I don't think it's the death of multilateralism. I think multilateralism will weaken significantly. Still, there will be international trade, there will be trade between Australia and China and a whole range of other countries, and Japan and China. I don't think that's going to completely disappear. That will continue. But the faith in multilateralism might weaken, and countries which have been pushing multilateralism, especially middle powers and smaller powers, for them this situation will become more difficult because, for example, ASEAN has been always a pivot or a center as a multilateral institution, and big powers were all, they were trying to have a very good relationship with this multilateral organization and modifying each other's relationship. But whether that's going to continue, whether in the form which we knew will continue, I think, in my view, there will be some erosion to begin with, and it will take a very long period of time to come back on multilateralism, what we know today, because the trend is very clear. China and US, they distrust each other, and with that, US allies, US partners will have somewhat different view of the world and of China, and that will complicate this matter further rather than sorting out these matters in any way we thought we might be able to sort them out. I think David has got something.
Something I was thinking about as you're talking then, Purnendra, this week with teaching, I was talking to students about John Ralston Saul's book from the 1990s, Unconscious Civilization, where he essentially made the argument by the 1990s, most countries were no longer producing leaders or being interested in leadership. They were in the main managing and producing managers, and the principal point of a manager was to repeat yesterday with slight refinements. So if we look, the majority of the world is pretty much been leaderless for a while. The real exception to this has been China with the CCP. Russia, in its own inimitable way, still has something resembling leadership. And I would say that the big thing I think out of this is that managerialism was failing, has shown itself to fail. And the desperate need to find leaders and leadership and acknowledge that whatever comes next is going to be difficult, but also it's an incredible opportunity for a reset. And the countries who can grasp the idea of a reset and leadership with a good dose of fear, that they could well, as we've seen in the last 20 years, China and Russia, if any space is given, they will fill it instantly. They may not know what to do with it at the moment, but they always fill vacant space. Because managers go, oh, what's going on? I don't understand. I'll have to ponder on that. We'll need a meeting. And that level of ineffectiveness and that managerialism is incredibly prevalent in Europe, the US, Australia, and a huge amount of Asia. But in all these places, we have a generation of people who are not yet the managers or leaders, people under 40 who know nothing in their lives other than 9/11, GFC, relative uncertainty, economic instability, and now this. And I think any country that is fast enough or smart enough to fast track this generation into leadership, not into management, has a massive opportunity to win.
Yes, hopefully, David, you are right. We do need, but the immediate issue is when this COVID-19, we are able to move again freely and we talk in person and not through all these technical devices. After that, I think this will be a chance for people to think about leadership. But the point here is, in the immediate future, what we are going to do, if the China-US relationship deteriorates, which it seems it might, in that situation, and when the US is becoming weaker and weaker, is self-isolating itself from the international community, there has to then, as you said, that China or Russia, they will step up and they will try to fill that gap or void. But lots of countries around this region would not like that situation to take place. They may have dependency on China, they may do trade with China, but they don't want China to be the top leader in this region. So there are some expectations, or there might be some possibilities that this multilateralism will continue in a weakened form. At the same time, countries like Japan, for example, because I study Japan, I'm referring to Japan in that sense as well. But, the Japanese government or the Japanese prime minister took some leadership in rescuing the TPP, for example. The government took some responsibility in pushing the idea of this regional comprehensive partnership, which is RCEP, with or without India. So there might be some expectations from Japan. After all, Japan is a country of Asia in the Indo-Pacific region. It's still the third largest economy of the world. It's a very stable society. It has got technology. It has got know-how. It's one of the largest donors of foreign aid. So whether or not there will be some eyes looking up to Japan to provide some kind of leadership, and that is a huge challenge. And whether that challenge the Japanese government takes or not, I think that will be very crucial, because I don't see any other country other than Japan who can step up and take the leadership, and a leadership which will be acceptable to the majority of nations around this region.
Yeah, Japan is now having a moment whether it wants it or not. And this is the thing. It may be too frightening for it. It may be too confronting. How much is going to be asked of it? But I think this is the critical thing. I sort of imagine Sean McFate at the moment sitting with a smirk going, I told you a lot about durable disorder a year ago and you had a freak out. Well, guess what? Now you've got a reason to freak out. Ian Bremmer must be sitting in his very comfortable chair at Eurasia Group, cackling, going, I told you a lot about pivot states and you didn't listen. Well, guess what? You could have prepared to win. Now you just have to scramble to survive.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of very smart people at the moment who are probably got a terrible combination of laughing and crying at the same time. And the thing that can't be denied here is while we're talking and using technology, there should be strategic elites within every country going, all right, get over the freak out. There's no time for the freak out because the game is on and the game is real, and the game is real like it hasn't been since before World War One. We're back in great game territory here with everything to play for and everything to lose.
I mean, Prime Minister Abe, in his press meeting, he said that Japan is facing the most serious crisis since the World War II, since the Second World War. But I think he referred this crisis in the context of Japan. But I guess this is also valid for most of the countries, because we did not have this kind of crisis before, where you have got health crisis, you have got financial crisis, you have got political crisis, you have got social crisis. All these crises put together, of course, we haven't seen anything like that since World War II. And if that's the case, we need to have some solutions as nations found after World War II. So who is going to lead this? How this leadership is going to look like? And you said there is no leadership at the moment. Of course, there is no transformational leadership. So we need a transformational leader and transformational leadership, not just transactional, that you have got this managerial ability to manage something, but you need to have some leaders who have got some long-term vision and can articulate those ideas, and then people accept those ideas and follow those ideas. I don't see those ideas, but hopefully there are some nuggets somewhere, and they will come out through this crisis.
Just on that, Purnendra, and I'll make this the final note. It's interesting that that David raised the issue of leadership, and while listening to him talk, I'm thinking, well, okay, traditionally speaking, we, the international community that was founded immediately after World War II by the United States, would automatically feel that we would have to find leadership from the United States. But is that really true now? I mean, the shibboleths have now been broken. Can we not find leadership elsewhere? I mean, does it have to be even in the Anglosphere, or can there be a set of universal norms and expectations that we can all galvanize around that doesn't come from the usual suspects, the United States, Great Britain, certainly not Australia, because, we're just too small and insignificant.
Just too small.
But, just other places, yeah?
Yeah. I think it
David?
has to be Japan in our region. Yeah, sorry, guys. I think it has to be Japan in our region. And Japan and South Korea between them have to get over their history. And Singapore, who manages to do things on a small scale, has so much to offer. They have to be a part of it. And we need to slide in with these three with some humility and function in whatever way we can. And India, I think, needs to see that this is the path forward, even if it's a path where they don't have as much status as they historically would have preferred.
Yes, you're right. And this leadership has to be a different kind of leadership, because after World War II, the American leadership was all about economic power and military power. And if we look up to Japan, Japan doesn't have the military power element to its capital, right? So its political capital is very limited. There might be some economic capital, but political capital is limited because it cannot have this military capacity. So whether we are going to look for a different kind of leadership, if not global, at least regional to begin with, so that leadership has to be different. So people have to accept that a leader has to be a different kind of leader this post-COVID-19. And whether Japan, as we have talked about, whether Japan is up to it and whether Japan is willing to do it. But I think this is a great opportunity for Japan to show its leadership, at least in the region, if not globally. Because I cannot still imagine that Japan will come out of a security treaty with the United States. I cannot imagine that Australia will come out of its treaty with the US, ANZUS. I cannot imagine that NATO will fall apart. So those things will remain. But within those remaining features, we need to find out different kinds of leadership. And it could be in blocks rather than in a huge chunk. It could be in different leadership blocks, one block here, one block there, another block. So through building blocks, we might work through, at the higher level. I don't know. These are just my ideas and thinking at this stage, not very developed, but we can talk about it and develop these things a little bit more.
Well, anyway, thank you very much for your time, Purnendra, and thanks for joining us on Strategicon.
Thank you, John and Tim and David.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you could subscribe to Strategicon through the Ozcast network, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and please like us on the Sage International Australia Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate your support. Also, please comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International Australia site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our products, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. Until next time, goodbye.
Traditionally, Toys for Tots has been a Christmas-time charity. In recent years, the program has evolved into a year-round force for good by distributing toys, games, and books to children in need throughout the year. Last year, during their 75th anniversary, the program distributed over 24 million toys to nearly 10 million less fortunate children and provided over 6.3 million books to children in need through their literacy program. Visit toysfortots.org to support their mission.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.